today's conversation. We are going to have a small turnout here today. So for those who've been kind of following on with our webinar series and invites and the ones posted on the site, we've hosted 6 of pretty much the same topic here the last day and a half. So if my voice is starting to run dry, that's why. But it's also the least signed up session. So we're looking at probably just a handful here today. So we can go ahead and get started. What I do want to do though is kind of set the stage a little bit on why we're having today's conversation. And I know it's a polarizing example, but kind of why I'm excited is I met with a group here this morning who is looking at revamping how they offer their scholarships. And one of the things that we looked at is like how they go through scholarship selection. And in that conversation, if you can believe it or not, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, they do random selections. They literally solicit applications for scholarships. They randomly generate a number, and that's who they award. And so I know that's an extreme example, but it's also a really good example of what we see within the space. The topic today obviously is around measuring impact on scholarships, highly focused on companies offering 2 different types of scholarships, either those internal for staff and for families or external for the community. To be very clear though, this does not have to be targeted just towards companies running HR driven scholarships. The takeaways from today and some of the things that we're going to look at are relevant to any scholarship organizations and providers. The reason why, though, we kind of niche down, I'm going to give an introduction here in a second, specifically on HR teams, is because we are seeing a growing number of organizations and companies offering scholarships as part of like their corporate social responsibility, again, either to internal staff and families or externally for the community. And both of those scholarships are 2 kind of very dramatically different types of workflows that we can kind of look at, but kind of like the premise behind that. So my wife, for example, works within benefits. She's in HR. And I know for a fact that every single day, she's not just doing benefits. Like her laundry list of job obligations is deep and wide, from event planning to events to you name it. And so when we get into like the concept of a scholarship, no matter how complex or how simple they are very important processes. It's also something that compliance, right? Fairness, efficacy is all very relevant. And there are some very unique nuances and elements that go into scholarship management, both from scholarship design and kind of the structure and how we run them, but also from an efficiency perspective. It's also why a lot of organizations have dedicated scholarship admins. Unfortunately, in a world without infinite money and infinite staff size, that's not highly relevant to most individuals. And so our goal here today is kind of take a look at Reviewr. I'm going to kind of give my introduction and kind of why we're having today's conversation is that we've been able to work with 2,000 plus organizations of all walks and lives of doing different types of scholarships and grants and different funding initiatives each and every year. And our goal is to try to take like what are the common core elements and best practices that we want to share with you who may, again, not necessarily be on the front lines as scholarship expert. It's just one of the many tasks that you've been assigned with of executing, right? How do we do so in the most efficient way as humanly possible? How do we also structure a scholarship process that's done the right way? And I know it's kind of interesting because we're going to look at Reviewr a little bit. It's not just the best practices around how to structure these programs. It leads us to the end result, which is the premise of today's conversation, which is measuring impact. I don't care the size or scope of the organization. Whenever we're doing scholarships and our teams come back and our boards come back and they say, hey, like, how do we measure the impact that this campaign had on people's lives, either employees, staff, families, or externally through the community? And it's not a hard question to answer if we have the data, but how we get to that end point is where the challenge lies. And it actually starts day one with the application process, how you go through selections, how you go through the decision making. And I like to think of it as like a domino effect or like a chain link where if you want to measure back on impact and like get testimonials from the recipients of the scholarship, right? How is it furthering their career trajectory? You can't get to that link if one of the links in advance breaks along the way. And so I want to kind of break today's conversation really into 3 parts. I'm going to keep it really simple on the first part, which is like, why do we offer them? You guys know why you offer scholarships. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on the call here today. This is more so for the follow-up resources that we're hopefully going to be sharing out afterwards for those that may be looking at incorporating scholarships that they're not currently doing it now. If anybody on this call currently does not do scholarships and you want me to spend more time on that, please do toss it in the chat. But For the sake of time and efficiency, I'm going to kind of skip through most of that just because, again, you wouldn't be here if you didn't know the benefits and the importance behind it. Where I want to spend the bulk of my time here today is how do we run them well? And then we're going to cover kind of like two main areas. One is going to be scholarship application design, like what does the applicant experience look like? And then I'm going to jump right to the end of the spectrum, which is how do we actually conduct a proper, fair, non-biased review and selection? Because at the end of the day, our brand and our organization's reputation is on the line. We also want to make sure that the most qualified candidates and the applicants are the ones who get selected, right? Going back to my story, I do not want you guys having to randomly generate a unique number and turn your scholarships into a sweepstakes, right? I want to make sure that the most impactful individuals are the ones that we're funding. And then I want to look at how do we measure if it's actually working or not. And in that section, I'm going to cover kind of two things. One is like a very simple like exercise or a framework that you can take and apply to your programs of like what characteristics do you want to report back on. And then I'm going to visually show you how to actually collect that information from the recipients in a low barrier way, but also in a way that you can actually leverage to be able to report back on the impact that's had. So with all that said, let's jump into things. Like I said, my goal here today is to take 2,000 plus scholarships per year, best practices, emerging trends, things that we're seeing within the ecosystem, and overwhelm you hopefully with best practices with or without Reviewr, and hopefully that some of those best practices stick that you can take and apply to your programs. Please do in the chat course, correct me if I'm kind of talking to the wrong demographic. Again, this was brought to us by a large number of individuals and organizations saying, hey, we're not a foundation, we're not a nonprofit, we're a corporate entity, but we are partnering with local foundations or partners to do community scholarships or internally for staff and families, and we feel relatively lost because that's not what our job obligations are. It's just another task that I've been tasked to do, and I don't know what to do, and that's kind of why we're having this conversation. So I mean, again, why it matters, you guys already know these things. I told you already that I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. At the end of the day, though, that the scholarships and the corporate social responsibility aspect to it is one of the most valuable benefits that can be provided, again, either to internal employee and staff and or to the local community, right? It's a reflection on the mission and vision of your brand, what you stand for. It's a direct pipeline, right, to building future employees, future talent. If it's an industry specific scholarship, so bear with me here, if you are a pharmaceutical company and you're partnering with like the American Hospital Association, you are fueling the next generation, not just of employees, but also those within the demographic and space that you serve. Internally, it's also a strong way to drive employee engagement and retention and loyalty. It is a very, especially nowadays, right, with the price of education and student loans, a very strong benefit you can provide. It's also a really compelling impact story for those of you who might be offering these scholarships externally, right? To be able to report back at a brand level over the last 3 years, we funded X number of individuals for X number of dollars. And by the way, not only do we fund them, but here's some of the impact stories that we can tell. X% are attending colleges who previously weren't able to do so. They're graduating with X% less student loans. They are getting a job in a career path that's relevant to their degree in X% less time than a non-scholar recipient, right? That's very impactful stories that you guys can tell if this is part of your CSR campaigns from a community perspective. With all that said, right, feeling impact is not the same as data-driven impact. And so again, we can't just add a hunch that, yeah, our scholarships are working, we're doing all these great things. How do we have, data that drives those decisions? And the proof is in the pudding. So what I want to start with here again is fundamentally how a scholarship can and should be structured. Some of this may be, just our own personal insights. Every organization has a different mission and vision. You're looking for different styles and different characteristics within scholars, but there are some things that need to be held true. And that's kind of what I want to look at. For those of you also who are just tasked with running your scholarships, what you likely did is you kind of went to your internal technology teams and your internal staff and said, hey, what tools do we have at our disposal? And when we ask that question, the first thing that comes up is, well, we have to have a way for an applicant to apply. Again, applicant's a broad term, could be external community, it could be internal staff and families, but we need a place for people to go to apply. So what generally happens is kind of two different angles. One is that we use like a built-in web form, either self-developed or using tools like SurveyMonkey or JotForm, you name it. We spin it up and we say, great, we have an online application. But then applications start to flow in and we start to hear from the end user. They're having challenges. They can't save and log out. There's no way for us as operators to track progress. We can't send them reminder messages. And then once applications come in, what do you do with it? At the end of the day, we don't want to be randomizing it. We don't want to be doing a coin flip of who we're going to be funding. We need to take those scholarship applications and disperse them to the appropriate teams to actually do a fundamental judging, scoring, review process. Again, style of scholarship will impact that. Is it through department heads? Is it through different locations? Is it external versus internal? But at the end of the day, there has to be a very clear line of we collected an application, somebody is going to physically review it, they're going to score it on its merits, and then make a selection. So when we kind of go to our IT team, what you end up getting back from them is basically a bunch of PDF packets. You get a bunch of spreadsheets, and this whole process I just described now turns into an operational headache for you because you're working offline through spreadsheets and through email. It's also very hard for us to tangibly get the scores. I mentioned beforehand that this is a chain link concept. And so when you go through that model and we decide to say, hey, I'm going to fund these, 15 people, how do we now expect them to come back and self-report on the impact that it's had? Not even just the impact that it's had, but what are the next steps? Do you need them to send like fund disbursement forms? Do they have to accept the scholarship? Do you want proof of enrollment? So then again, all of those different activities happen outside the platform. So going back to this slide, and again, I'm trying to rush through this so I can show this to you. I think it really is important to have dedicated processes and tools in place that go end to end, full life cycle from application intake through selection into the post decision making process. So let's start there. Again, a couple of things I want to look at. One is a very low barrier experience for the applicants who are applying. Time and time again, I hear that, well, I don't care if my process to collect applications is complex for them. If they want a scholarship, they're going to figure it out. And while there is some merit to that, right, like their effort level put into the applications is likely a reflection of who they are, at the same time, their interactions with the process is a direct impact and correlation on you as an organization, as a brand, right? We want to, our entire public perception of the scholarships happens on the application front. So we need to make sure it's clean, make sure it's very modern, make sure that nobody has any issues actually applying, ADA compliant, mobile responsive, as low barrier as humanly possible. I also want to look at how do we not waste people's times. I'm going to give an example. Let's just say you're, like one of the top 10 largest companies in the world. You're going to have an overwhelming number of people applying to your scholarships, right? Or if you're a small organization, you're going to have a bunch of ineligible applicants attempting to apply. And so how do we not waste an applicant's time if they're not eligible or vice versa? I also want to look at the concept of the application itself. I want us to have a pretty big mental shift away from just online applications and scholarship applications and looking at it more holistically as a concept called a profile. Because as you know, there are so many moving parts to scholarships. You've got the people applying, you've got their content, either submissions and file uploads, you've got communication back and forth, you've got the actual selection process. And then again, the last topic here today is measuring impact. All of those activities need to live in one centralized place. And that's that big kind of mental disconnect of it's not just an application, this is the scholar journey, which again starts with that concept called a profile. So I want to kind of walk you guys through that. I'm going to skip through some of these things. We're going to look at how you do a review and then what that post-scholar workflow actually looks like. So at the end of the day, using Reviewr obviously would be strongly beneficial, or any other type of tool like us, because it's a dedicated hub from start to finish. At its core minimum, we have to have an online experience for the applicants to go through. So generally speaking, you want to leverage your brand and your marketing. You want to leverage your websites as the main entry hub. You want to keep branding intact from start to finish. But what we want to basically do is start that concept of a profile. So applicants come in, they basically tell us who they are, and then it drops them into the applicant experience. And this is what I want to focus on here. So two things need to be true. Number one is that you're obviously collecting information from them that you will ultimately need for a decision-making process. And that decision-making process will look different for everybody. Some of you might be very heavily focused on financial need. Some of you may be really heavily focused on, academic achievements or community involvement or their impact to your organization. Others might be heavily focused on things like essay prompts and letters of recommendation and personal narratives. And there is no one size fits all. There's no right or wrong way of doing that. for me personally, it's how do we build a comprehensive snapshot in a low barrier way of who these scholars are. So again, a couple things come into play. There's that. But you also need to do so in a very simple manner for them. So we want them to be able to save and log out, come back later. Some of our data suggests that if you're running a scholarship with clear dates and deadlines, that 71% of applicants are going to apply the week of that deadline. And so if that's true, how do we allow them to save, come back later on, work at their own time, work at their own pace, but also flag them? That way you've got clear visibility on like how many people have actually started the process, who's done, who's not done, send them reminder messages. So we kind of set the stage here. Again, very obvious things, mobile responsiveness, ADA compliance. We want to leave no person behind. The next thing I want to kind of show you is we're basically collecting basic information around who the applicant is. And then if at all possible, I do like to try to work in some type of both matching tool and eligibility check. Now, this is where it's going to look dramatically different depending on like the size and scope of your scholarships. We work with some brands that offer, 150 scholarships per year. This will look different than those that offer just one. The idea behind this, though, is that you at the end of the day have characteristics that you're looking for in a scholar. Again, it could be staff, family, or externally. Some of those are very cut and dry. We want to fund people with a certain GPA or that have worked within our company for a certain number of years or who are pursuing a certain career path, right? And so in that example, we should ask them those questions. And then based off of their answers, we're going to allow them to either proceed or not. Seems like a small thing, but I don't want to waste their time nor your team's time vetting through ineligible submissions. If you are one of those organizations that offers multiple scholarships, and it could be 2+ or it could be 102+, humans in general don't read. They don't know what opportunities are even available to them. We want to see a very clear and simple path to their success. And so instead of saying, hey, go figure out what scholarship you want to apply for, if they can apply to multiple, having them redundantly re-enter their information each and every time. So we can leverage the persona that we built about the scholar to basically say, hey, based on what we know about you and what you just told us about yourself, of the 16 scholarships or the 9 scholarships that we offer, these are the 3 that you actually best align with. Now, of those, whichever all of them do you want to apply for? So we just did actually 2 very important things. Number one is that we brought visibility towards opportunities that they may not have known existed in the first place. Number 2 is we're allowing them, if you allow them to apply to multiple at the same time. So my name, my email, my address, that doesn't change from one application to the next, but it is a barrier because I have to re-enter it over and over again. So maybe like the Brooke Marlowe scholarship or the Lennox Wilder scholarship has its own unique essay prompt or its own unique deliverable. That's fine. We can then serve up a very hyper-specific form to them in one sitting, but not make them redundantly re-enter who they are, their address, their name, things of that nature. So basically applicants come in, they make their selection, and then we get into the bulk of the form. So again, this is subjective. You guys likely already have data that you're collecting from a scholar. This is a very common workflow, and you can scale this back. But most organizations will collect 3 key points of data around the applicant. It's either going to be, if it's an external scholarship, academic achievements as well as community involvement, or if it's internal scholarships, it's more understanding like, their job position, their career trajectory, what they're looking for as far as goals go, their length of employment, things like that. But we're basically getting either an employment or academic snapshot of who they are. The next thing we're looking at is financial impact, right? Again, because not all applicants are made equal. So we're collecting things like, well, what are you going to use the scholarship for? Are you going to be pursuing a certain degree? Are you going to be going to a certain school? What are your anticipated expenses? How much scholarship funding are you looking for? What's your household income? Potentially collecting things like tax documentation to verify it. Again, this is just one of those 3 pieces that makes up the comprehensive profile of the applicant. But again, you'll be able to control this. And then the third piece here is the more merit-based. So it's a combination of things like letters of recommendation. It could be essay prompts, things like that. This is very common. Most of the scholarships that we work with, are competitive based. And so the best way to give your applicants a voice to help them differentiate themselves versus their peers is things like essays and personal narratives. I do love this concept here for letters of recommendation from 2 different paths. If it's an external scholarship, you could be collecting like external letters of recommendation or personal narratives or statements about them. If it is an employee or staff based scholarship program, you could use this as like testimonials or like department head or manager write statements about them as well. Why this works really well though is how we collect that. So basically the person applying can put in like who their manager is, or if it's externally, who's writing their letter of recommendation. It could be a coach or a leader in the community. What this will then do is it triggers a notification directly to them saying, hey, Dwight, you've been asked to write a personal statement on behalf of Kyle. Click here to do so. And that basically brings them to a dedicated place to do that. You can still do the very traditional letter recommendation if you want. Most of our clients have shifted away from that, and they instead do basically statements, or they do templates. So if this was like a manager would say, hey, talk about these three things. Or if it's externally, it could be talk about these three things. The beauty of this is that once this recommendation gets submitted, it gets stuck back to the applicant profile automatically. And ideally speaking, you keep it private. If it's an employee or staff-based scholarship, you probably don't want them to see what their managers are saying. I don't think they're going to say bad things, but it is a very private, honest conversation. So efficiency wise, it loops all together for you, but also controls who can actually access it. And what this does is it opens the door for your operations. So again, I'm trying to stay high level because I know we have a wide variety of people on today's conversation, but the goal of today was to talk more so around like HR driven employee, spouse, family scholarship. So with that mindset in place, again, you have so many different obligations. We want you to have a centralized command center built for the task at hand. And so the idea is that you can kind of come in here and in real time, you have a command center for your scholarships. You can track dates and deadlines. You can track recent activity. You can track where they're at within their journey. That journey in itself is quite important because on the front end, you can track progress. You can see who started but hasn't finished versus those that did finish. You can automate reminder messages to them. You can send them emails through the system. Same thing goes with references. Either you can ping the managers or the external people doing the letters of rec saying, hey, we see that you've been asked to do this for so-and-so. It's not been done yet. Don't forget the deadline is, 3 days from now. Helps, get those across the finish line. Going back to like the main conversation, right, which is measuring impact, at some point in time, you're going to fund an individual and you're going to want them to come back and submit to you a series of tasks, acceptance letters and packets, fund disbursement forms, proof of enrollment, impact reports, testimonials, whatever it is that you want to collect. At that point in time, you have to have two things. One is a way to actually collect it, which we'll look at. And then two is to be able to physically see who's in that stage, have they done it or not, and then automate reminders to them. If your goal is to kind of survey and do like an annual review or a 6-month review of your scholars, nobody wakes up 6 months from now and says, hey, I'm going to go submit my impact report of how I'm using the scholarships, right? Or maybe your scholarship is more reimbursement based, right? And you want them to come back once a quarter or once a semester and upload receipts, they're not going to do that on time, right? So being able to see who's in those stage, have they done it or not, and automate those reminders will go a tremendously long way for you, especially as you balance and juggle all your other job obligations. So how do we do things like that? Again, I want to make sure that we kind of shift our focus around application intake and more towards like that profile concept. So what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to filter down by all of the profiles in this menu. This is literally a list of all the individuals who either A, applied, or B, who have started. Your filtering will be dependent on your program. It could be by department, it could be by team, it could be by location. Be basically this hyper-focused list of those who are applying to the program. From there, you can click into the name or ID of who they are, and we in real time will aggregate all their information relevant to the program in one centralized place. So again, in this case, we have Michael, the applicant. All of their information lives in one hub. I know who they are. I have their job descriptions and information. I've got their transcripts, their budgets, whatever. Again, to be clear, whatever data you want to collect from them would show up here. On top of that, we have all of our communication tools. So we can automate a lot of them via notifications and updates. Maybe you want to reach out to them personally, send them a direct message or send them an email. Maybe you want to do bulk emailing. All of that can be done. You can also leave internal comments and notes as well. So maybe your internal staff and team, as you're kind of going through the selection process, they're reading through the applications, wants to leave comments and notes about a scholar, disperse it across your team, virtually collaborate, but not allow the applicant to see it. You can do so. Also, all of our file uploads are logged within the account. So if the goal was for them to upload their resume and the transcript or whatever those a headshot, right, media release form, all of that lives on their account. Better yet, you don't have to worry about downloading it and exporting it and using other tools. You can simply press view, and then that file upload lives directly on your account. So again, depending on like the size and scope of this, if we can shave 2 to 4 minutes per submission by not having to download, export, go use other tools and come back, that compounds very, very quickly. And then again, going back to like the manager testimonials or the external letters of recommendation, those also live within here. So I know for a fact that both Steve and Paula submitted testimonials on behalf of Michael. When I click he or she's name, the answers to their testimonial then shows up directly on my account. Now, bigger picture, this concept of a supplemental form is really important because that's also how we assign them tasks. So at some point in time, what we're hoping to see is under Michael's account a list of additional deliverables that they submitted to you. On disbursement forms, impact reports, testimonials, things like that. So hopefully you can start to visualize that, hey, this is not just like an online form for the scholars to fill out. They really are creating this comprehensive profile that grows and grows and grows as they progress through the end-to-end journey of the scholarship. So what I want to spend some time on here again is the review and selection. So this is the most critical element to running a scholarship. At the end of the day, you collect scholarship applications. You need to read through them and make a decision. How you get to the decision in itself is a combination of best practices, but also workflow design. So what we're looking at here is a concept called buckets. I want to introduce this because obviously this is how we would power it. I'm also going to give you some insights. So what we're looking at is a way to categorize the scholars. There are many ways you can do this. If you offer an external scholarship to your local community, this could be a list of all the different scholarships that you're offering. When an applicant applies, it drops them into the scholarship bucket that matches their scholarship, right? If it's internal, these could be different departments, right? We've got our technology team, we have our marketing team. I'm just making up examples. And so basically the applications as they come in are being routed to the appropriate buckets or the appropriate teams. It also controls progression. So within these buckets, you might have like an initial thumbs up, thumbs down pre-review. You might have like your executive committee getting together and filling out score sheets. And then of course you have the ongoing selected workflows. So you're taking within those buckets a progression system of the scholar as they move through their journey. And then the critical piece to that is within these buckets, a way for you to pair up the applicant with your team to conduct a review. And that's where you need to kind of self-reflect on like, how do you do this? Are you a lean and mean team where basically your internal committees and your executive committee reads through every single one of them and they judge them and score them? That's great. You just grant them access to all of the applications. Are you more forward thinking, more innovative, and you want to leverage like AI assistance first to get that list down more narrow and then have our team come in? That's great. We can power that. Is it external where you have like a dedicated team or committee by scholarship? There's so many ways to set that up. The main takeaway that I want to give you here, though, and this is like a fundamental make or break for scholarship design, is when a team member is reviewing scholarship applications, fatigue is a real thing. Humans get tired. They read through applications, everything starts to look very similar. On average, most individuals reviewing applications struggle to look at more than 30 submissions apiece. Do you have flexibility? Maybe, right? It depends on staff size and team size. Obviously, not using Reviewr, that number goes up dramatically. So we know for a fact that on average, if you read more than 30 submissions, scores 31 through 51 are actually scored on a different scale, right? So if I was the first person reviewed, I'm actually being scored completely differently than if I was the 31st person being scored. That is a fundamental issue with the fairness and the compliance of the program. With that said, we also know that on average, each application should be reviewed between 3 to 5 times. If it's reviewed less than 3 times, we don't really have enough data to kind of help, build a compelling case for who a high versus low quality submission looks like. If we are scoring them more than 5 times, there is a very clear law of diminishing return. The data doesn't move the needle a whole lot. The scores really don't change. So now that we know these things, well, we know that each scholar should be reviewed between 3 to 5 times, and our team will have some hidden biases and fatigue sitting at around 30. We can leverage that to make decisions on how we want to pair people up. So again, what you could consider doing is tiering your program with multiple stages. Stage one is a very simple thumbs up, thumbs down. Is this person somebody that we should advance on to the steering committee or not? And then at that point, we can then release it to the full team. What you could also consider doing is to lower your time on task. If you open these workflows up, it'll show you a list of every single applicant who applied and who from your team in theory could review them. So you could say, I trust what Kyle is saying, and I want every scholar reviewed 3 to 5 times. You can recruit department heads, you can recruit managers, you can recruit external individuals to help with the review, and then you can literally type in, hey, I want every applicant who applied for a scholarship to be reviewed between 3 to 5 times, or 3 times, no more, no less. You can type that into the system, and then it will equally and randomly kind of pair them up for you. So we're talking about here is really important. It's basically taking our applicants, divvying it out to our team for a selection, but the mindset of how we pair them up actually fundamentally does have a direct impact on compliance and on the fairness of the program. The other thing that we want to look at is how do you conduct a review? So generally speaking, if it's an internal staff employee family scholarship, we know who they are. That can or may not be a problem. Generally speaking, we like to try to do data redaction. So hiding name, hiding demographics, hiding personal identifying information. So when your committees come in to read through the applications each quarter or once a year, it's just a list of ID numbers. At that point, they simply can click on the name or ID of the applicant and then review them. Again, small things. This list should also be completely shuffled. If me and Susie are both on the same committee, we're both given the exact same 10 submissions to look at. The 10th person that I look at should not be the 10th person that she or he looks at, because again, fatigue has set in. We're also now comparing that 10th person against everybody else above me. So now instead of reviewing them on the merits of their application, it's turning into a comparison to the other candidates, and that's not the goal. We want to remove emotions. We want to remove comparisons. We want to be using structured, data-driven scorecards to tell a story. So at that point, I can kind of click into the name or ID of who the scholar is, and then I get a split screen. I basically have on one half of my page their information. Again, this is their application form. These are their file uploads, all in one spot. And then the other half of the page is your selection tool. That's completely customizable. Your selection tools are going to look different for everybody on today's call. Your scorecards and your selection criteria have to align with the mission and vision of A, your organization, and B, the scholarships themselves, right? Like, what are you looking for in a candidate? It could be academic achievements, it could be financial need. One thing I will tell you though is let's get away from this whole like scoring them on a scale from 1 to 20, because how do you justify a 16 versus a 17? Seems like a small thing, but when we look at the results and we average it out, it certainly will move the needle. So, we love emotional responses on this front, from below average to above average. The reason why I like that is you can still assign point values to it, but it speeds up the review, the quality of the review goes up, and the individual person reviewing has a similar tendency, right? They're going to start to deviate from what was initially a 16 by the time they review 35 people is now a 9, right? But if it's from above average to a below average, the odds of their scores deviating and drifting from their own personal median is far less likely. So the idea behind this is that we made a very fair process by incorporating these mechanisms of assigning them out. We are redacting the data. We're using quality data-driven scorecards. And then as a result of that, you basically get these built-in dashboards and leaderboards. And this will literally show you a list of every applicant who applied to a scholarship, who from the team reviewed them, and then the raw data of those individual reviews. Either these become the metrics that you live and die by, and that's how you do the selections, or you can use this to then power like an executive team deliberation meeting to kind of make their final selections. So hopefully there's some impactful things there. What this also does is unlocks the next piece to the puzzle, which is measuring what actually matters. So I don't know, obviously on the call, how you guys are doing this right now. Generally speaking, with a scholarship, once somebody has been funded, there are two very distinct workflows. Only one of those two is being done. Number one is it's basically like, what's next, right? You need to accept it. We want to know proof of enrollment. If it's an employee-based scholarship, maybe you want them to come back and do reimbursements and receipts, right? So there's that pure data element to it. The other element to it is measuring the impact of the program. And so, again, a couple things come into play here. There are things like vanity metrics versus things that actually mean something to you guys. Most organizations report back once a year on, hey, we ran a scholarship this year. We received this number of submissions. Here's who we funded. Here's how much we funded them for. Great, let's go celebrate. When in reality, we want to be measuring things like, the output of those scholarships, right? Employee engagement scores. Is it community impact? How many people graduate with X% student loans? All those things I talked about earlier on. We basically want you to have like a leaderboard or a dashboard of the program's impact. And again, how you measure impact will look different depending on the demographic. Is it for internal employees, staff, and family, or is it locally for the community? So we can kind of give you some examples of each one of those, but there are a clear separation, right, of who the intended audience is. The key here, though, is that you can't measure what wasn't collected. And this conversation starts at day one during scholarship design, right? We need to have very clear expectations on like who we want to be funding. What is the ultimate goal of this scholarship? During the application phase, we have to make sure we collect the proper data to lead us to the proper decision making. We want to make sure that during the review and selection process that we're funding those based off of those parameters. And then you have to set kind of a clear next step reporting deadlines and clear follow-ups, right? So if we want to measure things like what percent less had to take out student loans, we need them to kind of self-report and come back and figure out, hey, did the scholarship cover the full expense or did you take out student loans? If you are very ambitious, which I think this is very realistic for most of you, if you want to survey them post scholarship and say, hey, how long did it take you to get a job in your certain career path? Or did your hourly wage increase from where it started? That's not hard to do. We just have to know that that's the type of stuff that we want to collect. And there has to be an instrument in place to actually collect that from them. So again, the idea is like, how do we turn your reporting from we awarded 16 people X number of dollars to here's how many people we touched, here's the reach that we had on both the community, their families, and the employees, here's the real outcomes we had on it. And then by the way, here's how we can measure an ROI or return on investment for the money that we poured into the scholarships themselves. So again, here's some examples. We'll send this back out with some actual better ones, but your reach is, volume, how many people are awarded, disbursements across departments, across teams, communities, outcomes, are our scholars on track or off track? If they're off track, especially if they are employees, spouses, or family, how do we not wait 1 year? How do we like 6 months into the scholarship measure, hey, they're struggling, right? They're trying to go to school while doing their day jobs. How do we, help them, mentor them, give them the assistance that we need, right? How do we course correct? Are we seeing an increase in talent development or our pipelines, the number of new applicants we've gotten to our jobs? What are the testimonials or the stories that we want to tell if it's a community-based scholarship? So to wrap things up here, I'm running 8 minutes long, so I do apologize. This concept is not challenging whatsoever if you have the tools in place. All we're simply doing is saying, hey, when we award somebody a scholarship, what are the clear deliverables that we want to collect from them in the future? And what does that timeline look like? I want them to come back right away and accept it. I want them then to submit proof of enrollment. I want them to check in 3 months and tell us how the scholarships are going. Are they off track or on track? I want them to come back in 1 year and fill out a much more comprehensive brief. And then who knows, maybe 3 years from now, you want a testimonial again, right? All you're simply doing is taking your scholars in a dedicated tool, moving them to that workflow. Once they move to that workflow, we just assign them out those tasks. So in 3 months, they get notified and say, hey, it's time for you now to come back to do your progress report or your check-in. As soon as they've been awarded, hey, great, congratulations. Now we need you to do proof of enrollment and an acceptance packet. So they get a link, they click on it, they submit it. They can also come back to their kind of applicant portal. They can then pick from a list of tasks that you've assigned to them, such as scholar acceptance packet. They can directly fill it out. They can submit it. And by the way, the answers to that task live on their account. So it kind of comes full circle with Michael starting a profile has now turned into profile, forms, files, communication, judging and scoring, the results, and all ongoing, employee engagement with them as far as these deliverables. And this is how you can start to generate the reports because the tool knows who they are, what they applied for, how they were selected, and the reporting schedule that they owe you from there on out. So With all that said, I am going to pause here, get a sip of water, answer as many questions as you guys might have for me. Again, kind of going back to like why we're having the conversation. There are a lot of different people on today's call doing different types of scholarships. Some of you guys are doing them externally for local communities. Some of you are doing it for employees, spouses, and families. They are very different workflows. How you get from point A to point B will look different for all of you. But at the end of the day, unless you are a admissions office at a major university who've been doing scholarships for 15 years, this is not your expertise. And that's okay to say that, right? You've been given so many different job obligations and tasks. This is just one of them. With that said, it is a very important one. So how do we then equip you with both the tools, but also the best practices to run them the best way as we humanly can? So hopefully some of those insights are helpful. So like I said, I'm going to pause myself, but if you have any questions, comments, or you want to add to the conversation, please do toss them in the chat. Okay, getting pretty quiet. So I really do appreciate all of your time today. Like I said, we will follow up with like a recap of the conversation, both video format, text format, things like that. But yeah, if there's anything else I can ever do for any of you, please do let me know. One comment just came in around, a scholarship committee that has been worried about fatigue because you are, reviewing around 25 submissions. What I would tell you, Sarah, for that comment, around like tiering the reviews. There are so many different ways you can structure like the review tiers. It also depends on like how open you are to leveraging tools like AI because we have these tools built in natively to Reviewr. Let's be honest with ourselves. Word vomit is a thing. I'm doing it right now. Right, I did the whole conversation. And so as we collect these scholarship applications, we're collecting a lot of data, but we're not collecting a lot of unique information. We're collecting resumes, testimonials, impacts. We're collecting like their transcripts. What we need as a review team, realistically speaking, is a one-page brief of the key details about the applicant. Now, that's not what we're going to use to make final selections, but as a way to get from a large pool of applicants down to a much smaller number, those review briefs give our team what they need to make a quick selection to advance them on. And if we can cut the time on task from 15 minutes per submission down to 4, that compounds very, very quickly. So that's one option. I would also kind of challenge us and say, hey, like, how did we get to the point where the team is only looking at 25 submissions a piece? Is it because you only had 25 submissions? Okay, that's fine. But if you incorporated the random review, like I mentioned beforehand, maybe you had 325 submissions and you equally spread it across your staff. One concern that I have is called reviewer tendencies. I, as Kyle, might be a way higher or lower score than your other peers. And so if you randomly assign me a submission and I'm a tough judge, that applicant's now at a disadvantage because I'm just inherently going to score them higher or lower than somebody else. So at least within Reviewr, we have a concept called tendencies and normalization, and it'll actually help you measure on a per committee member basis what is their personal tendency. Like, does Kyle give out scores of 25s or 65s, right? And then once we know that, it can actually normalize the results for you. It basically would tell you, hey, Kyle scored this applicant X% higher or lower than his own personal average. And then once we can normalize it, we can then average across the other reviewers. So yeah, I'm happy to kind of pick up that conversation offline and kind of dive deeper into like potentially how we can help. Amazing. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. I'm going to let us all go, but as always, I know I did drop my calendar into the chat. Really appreciate it and looking forward to continuing the conversation.